We now take leaders' questions. Under Standing Order 36, Deputy Mary Lou McDonald, please.
Good morning, Count Corla. Taoiseach, Fine Gael has been in government for 13 years, and in that time the housing crisis has gone from bad to worse. It's not an accident. We now have a full-blown housing disaster because the government has the wrong priorities and the wrong policies. And as a result, many workers and families are simply unable to put a secure, affordable roof over their heads. A defining feature of Fine Gael housing policy has been the enrichment of the private players, the big corporate landlords, the cuckoo funds, the vultures. I want to raise one area in which your mismanagement and incompetence in housing looms large. That is your long-term leasing fiasco. Figures released to our housing spokesperson Owen O'Brien reveal the extent of the scandal, and it is shocking. From the government that brought you the most expensive hospital in the world, the yet undelivered Children's Hospital, we now know you have agreed 9,000 leasing deals with property funds for the provision of social housing. The cost, a whopping €3.24 billion. Leasing agreements to last 25 years, and these leases don't come cheap. Many are costing more than €2,500 a month, with the government agreeing a 25-year lease on one Dublin property to the tune of €3,200 per month. And these costs can only be adjusted upwards. They can't come down. These properties, these leases, are subject to upward-only rent reviews every 3 years and are not limited by your 2% cap. A very, very sweet deal for the property funds. The money forked out by the state on these 25-year deals is often more than the cost of buying the property outright. And here's the kicker, Taoiseach. After handing over billions of taxpayers' public money, when these deals end, the properties go back to the property funds. Wow, you couldn't make this up. This is scandalous, short-sighted, negligent waste of taxpayers' money by government. Instead of investing to boost state-owned social housing stock, you're paying out huge sums of taxpayers' money to big shop property funds for homes the state won't own. The incompetence here is off the charts. Once again, under Fine Gael, the property funds are laughing all the way to the bank. Tá policy lig leas fad thermach an rialtas curna bilún in Aragat cain ícari a mú. Léiríonn siarís gúil polithe tíochta mícheart fad ag Fine Gael. Taoiseach, back in 2021, government committed to the phasing out of these long-term leasing deals for social housing by 2025. But instead, you have performed a big and very expensive U-turn. You've locked the taxpayer into this madcap policy for the next 2.5 decades. Far from phasing out this wasteful policy, you've turbocharged it with bumper profits for property funds. And this puts up in lights that Fine Gael is never, ever going to solve the whole housing crisis. Simple truth is, you're not capable of it. Billions of taxpayers' money spent on expensive leasing arrangements instead of ambitious investment to deliver public homes on public land. Taoiseach, we know 9,000 of these leasing deals have been made. Can you tell us today how many more of these deals are currently under negotiation? I want to challenge you today to put a stop to them, to stop wasting taxpayers' money and bring this bad policy to an end.
Thank you, Deputy McDonald. Taoiseach, please.
Well, thanks very much, Cian Corla, and thanks to Deputy McDonald for raising the question. Firstly, you like to talk about our party's time in government. Well, let me say this. When my party came to government in 2011, there were fewer than 7,000 homes built that year. Since then, despite a global pandemic and the construction sector having to be shut down on many occasions, we've now seen a situation where more than 32,000 homes were constructed last year alone. We're at the point now where later this year we'll be in a position to revise housing targets upwards for the years ahead. We live in a country where 500 individuals or couples are buying their first home every week. In the 12 months to February of this year, just under 2,600 applications were approved for the First Home Scheme, a scheme you oppose. And work has now commenced this year, every working day, on 337 new homes across this country. And today the government decided to extend the operation of rent pressure zones for a further year until the 31st of December 2025. So you like to talk about failure, but the statistics actually show very significant progress being made for very many homeowners. In relation specifically to the issue regarding long-term leasing, let me be clear. The phasing out of long-term leasing is well underway, with 3,500 social homes to be delivered through long-term leasing from 2022 to the end of 2025. Most of the target is already subscribed with proposals, tapering down from 1,300 units in 2022 to just under 200 units in 2025. The managed phase-out of long-term leasing by the end of 2025 is underway, and as I've said, the annual leasing targets for local authorities are already reducing year on year, because we are moving to a position where we are continuing to construct and bring about more social housing. But we also have to approach this housing challenge using every single lever at our disposal. And government shouldn't and doesn't apologise in relation to that. We need to find as many ways as possible of using every possible avenue and pathway to deliver homes for our people, be they social homes, be they affordable homes, be they homes to buy, and with a variety of initiatives that we've already put in place. So allow me to assure you today, Deputy, that the government's policy to end long-term leasing under Housing for All has not changed, and long-term leasing will be ended by the 31st of December 2025. But leasing does enable a portion of social housing needs to be addressed in the short run. And surely that is a good thing, that every single day, every single one of us works to maximise the amount of supply and the amount of housing options available to people whom I'm sure you meet when I go across the country, when you go across the country, as I do as well. But housing supply is very much going in the right direction, and that provides government with very many more options now in relation to delivering for people. And there are reasons for people to now be hopeful in terms of being able to own their own home.
Thank you, Taoiseach. Deputy McDonald.
So as I go across the country, Taoiseach, I meet people who live with the consequences of your housing policy. And here's what they experience: record rents that they struggle to afford, record homelessness, which leaves families and children in misery, a collapse of home ownership, and an entire generation locked out of any real expectation that they will ever own their own home. And consequential to that, so many, particularly of our young people, choosing instead to simply pack their bags and leave. That's the reality of your housing policy on the ground. There is nothing short-term about a 25-year lease. I put it to you that there are 9,000 of these wasteful arrangements. I've asked you to tell us how many more are under negotiation. Far from winding this policy down, last year you had more leases than the previous year. So the data tells us that you're moving in the wrong direction. These leases are costly, these leases are ineffective, and they are, as I said earlier, glaring confirmation that Fine Gael and your government will not solve this housing crisis. You will simply make it worse.
Thank you, Deputy. Taoiseach.
And your rhetoric certainly won't solve it either. And proposing to abolish all of the schemes that we put in place that help people move out of the box room and into their own home certainly won't make progress either. I've answered the question very clearly in relation to the long-term leasing and the government's plan to end that by the 31st of December 2025. That is the government position, it was the government position, it remains the government position. But far from the Ireland you paint, here's the Ireland that many people looking to buy a home and looking to rent live in today. They live in an Ireland where their government has just decided to extend the rent pressure zones for a further year. They live in an Ireland where there's a renter's tax credit in place and a wish to do more in relation to that to help meet the cost of rent and help people save for a deposit. They live in an Ireland where 500 people a week now buy their first home. They live in a country where 337 new homes are going to construction every single working day. That's around 29,000 homes so far this year. They live in a country where there's a Help to Buy, an initiative to give them some of their own money back, which you oppose. And they live in an Ireland where there's more social homes being built now than any time since the 1970s.
Thank you, Taoiseach. Deputy Holly Cairns, please.
Margaret Cairn Corla. Taoiseach, it's now more than 3 years since the then Taoiseach Micheál Martin gave a very clear commitment. In response to questions from my colleague Catherine Murphy, he said he was opposed to the state entering long-term leasing deals for social homes. To quote him directly, he said, "No local authority should be on the other side of this, engaging in long leases with institutional investors." He followed that up a few weeks later with another very clear statement. He said, "Long-term leasing is bad value. That is my view, and I continue to make it clear." The practice, we were told, would be phased out, except it wasn't. In the Sunday Business Post at the weekend, we learned that the state is continuing to enter into these deals, and the rents being charged are through the roof. Deals with rents up to €3,200 per month have been agreed. That means that over the course of a 25-year lease, the state is spending more than €900,000 on a single social home. And having spent nearly €1 million to rent it, the state then hands the home back to the developer or the vulture fund. So the state pays through the nose and is left with nothing except the bill. No asset, no home. In total, the state has agreed to almost 9,000 of these deals at a combined cost of nearly €3.2 billion. And all of these deals come with upward-only rent reviews, which are not subject to caps in rent pressure zones. You couldn't make it up. Quite literally, if you wanted to design a worse way to provide social housing, you couldn't. Every single aspect of the deal is bad for the state, and investment funds are loving it. These sweetheart deals are a cash cow for them. There's literally no downside. They lock in sky-high rents, include upward-only rent reviews, and ensure they retain ownership of the asset at the end. Taoiseach, you've spoken a lot recently about common sense. Can I ask you, do these long-term leases sound like common sense to you? Do they sound like value for money? Do you stand over them? Or, if we're honest, are they only necessary because of this and successive government failure? Failure to tackle the housing disaster? Failure to meet your social housing targets? Failure to deliver on government commitments? One of those commitments, let's remember, was a promise to phase out long-term leasing. Taoiseach, when will this government end long-term leasing of social homes, and when will you actually meet your own new build social housing targets?
Thank you, Deputy Taoiseach.
Thanks very much to Deputy Cairns for also raising this matter. So firstly, I think context is important. While I've already outlined the government's intention to end the use of long-term leasing by the end of 2025, I do want anybody watching in at home to be aware that this is a very small part of our overall housing provision, and an even smaller part, and also a very small part of our social housing provision. Just allow me a moment, Deputy. So 2023, last year, did see the highest annual output of social homes in decades. It is a statement of fact to say that we saw the highest level of new build social housing since 1975. Never in your lifetime nor my lifetime were more social homes provided than were provided last year. Over 4,000 affordable housing supports were also delivered last year through approved housing bodies, local authorities, the Land Development Agency, the First Home Scheme, the Cost Rental Tenant in Situ Scheme, and the Vacant Property Refurbishment Grant. This represents a massive increase of 128% on the previous year as well. We now have over 1,600 cost rental homes already being delivered, and funding is now in place to support the delivery of more than 4,000 affordable homes by 21 local authorities. And I say this for context, because yes, long-term leasing has been an element of housing provision, because in an emergency you use every tool at your disposal, and you ask, what does the state get in return? Well, it gets a roof over the head of some vulnerable citizens needing a house today. That's what it gets, because housing policy can't just be about ideology in an emergency. It has to be about using every single provision. No, well, it might be funny to laugh and joke over there.
Can we have the Taoiseach?
I'd appreciate that, because I doubt Deputy Cairns needs your assistance. But it might be funny to laugh and tease her over there in relation to this. But there's real people living in these homes. There's real people with roofs over their head. And there's additional housing solutions that this government has invested taxpayers' money in providing. Because when it comes to housing, we take a pragmatic view. Unlike some of you who rule this out and rule that out, we will use every tool at our disposal to maximise the availability of housing supply for our citizens. That is a good thing to do in an emergency. But let's be clear, the views of the Taoiseach, are the views of myself as Taoiseach, are the views of the three parties in this government. We do want to see an end to long-term leasing. We've been clear that the use of long-term leasing will end by the end of 2025. And I do need to say there's figures out there that I don't believe to be accurate, because a figure of 3.25 billion has been stated, but that's based on the cost of all leasing over 25 years, and it's based on 8,900 operational units. These figures assume that all operational leased units have a remaining term of 25 years. That is not the case. So we need to be very careful and accurate about the figures we put out there. It's not, Deputy. I don't really know what to touch on.
Taoiseach, you reel off a whole load of figures to say you want to give context to the situation, but you leave out the very important figures that give context to the situation, which is record homelessness, record house prices, record people stuck in their childhood bedroom. And I think that context is pretty important as well. You might be new to the job, but Fine Gael certainly isn't. This government isn't. Your party's been in office for 13 years now. Clear commitments have been given, including a commitment to end long-term leasing. The practice of long-term leasing is actually just one of those broken promises. So you're now promising that it will be phased out, just like when Micheál Martin was the Taoiseach, he promised it would too, 3 Taoiseachs ago. And I think you might understand why to people out there it feels like the personalities change, but the broken promises remain the same, because there's a fundamental difference between the narrative that you're putting out and what the government is actually doing. So even yesterday I heard you on the Pat Kenny show saying that we need at least 50,000 homes per year, but the government set out a target as 33,000, and the Minister for Housing is saying that that won't change, at least until next year.
Thank you, Deputy.
So you're not in opposition, you're the leader of this government. If you want to change that, why don't you? Why is this promise to end long-term leasing any different to the last one? What's actually going to change?
Taoiseach, please.
See, I respect you, but please don't misrepresent my position at all, because I never said, ever said anywhere that there'd be 50,000 homes built this year. So let's not try to create a rift where one doesn't exist. What I said very clearly is this country needs to build 250,000 new homes between 2025 and 2030. It does, by the way. The Construction Federation industry, who are many of their members are involved in building the houses, believe that is eminently doable. I've already just told this House this afternoon that we've seen 29,000 houses go to construction this year so far. We've just started the month of May. There are reasons to be hopeful in relation to housing supply, and I absolutely stand by and double down that we will need to lift the scale of ambition in the second half of this decade, and there's a very clear process that all three parties in government agree with. We will publish a draft national planning framework in the month of June that will set out indicative headline numbers that will go out to consultation, and finalised breakdown and composition of those numbers will be published in the autumn. There's no broken promise in relation to the phasing out of long-term leasing. It's the exact commitment the government has consistently been giving that it'll end by the end of 2025. And that figure is not correct.
Deputy Brid Smith,
that figure is not correct.
Taoiseach, reports in the media indicate that, and you can confirm this following your cabinet meeting this morning, that the government intends rolling back on labour market measures, including the further rollout of a minimum wage to a medium wage, and the increase of sick leave sort of staggered in until 2026 to bring the entitlement of sick leave up to 10 days for every worker. Now, I get it that we're in a period where you want to improve your vote in the local and the European elections, and that a big part of the base of Fianna Fáil and Fine Gael are the SMEs, they're the small and medium business enterprises, and I get it that you're going to want to do something for them in the lead up to an election. But what are you doing to the 1.3 million workers employed in SMEs when you talk about actually cutting back on commitments made on the minimum wage and sick pay? You see, I remember when your Minister for Finance sat there during the austerity years and says we are picking the low-hanging fruit, and he meant it. But it just strikes me that if you are bringing in this measure, that's exactly what you're attempting to do, is to pick the low-hanging fruit to impress your base. Now, it's important to say that there are obviously very serious problems with some of the small enterprises out there, and they are struggling, but not all of them are struggling. There are 1.3 million people employed in SMEs. Not all of them are that S or that M. You have to have at least 250 employees or below to be described as an SME. So there's a huge spectrum within that. And what my question to you is, if you're going to target labour measures that are progressive and that have been promised to some of the lowest paid and worst treated workers in the country, why are you not targeting those measures to those who need it, rather than giving a blank cheque to the entire SME sector, many of whose profits are going up? And that is true of hospitality and retail. Profits have gone up, the cost of living has not come down sufficiently, and you're telling workers, where you made a commitment that you would bring their standard of living up, you're now pulling back on it. And can you please justify that sort of policy in this day and age, in one of the richest countries in Europe, that is now going to be, as I say, picking the low-hanging fruit and attacking the people who are worst off in this country? Yes, give supports to those businesses, those small businesses in local towns and communities that are struggling, but does the support have to include penalising the worst off workers and those that are on a promise from this government that they will do better in terms of sick leave and a median wage that they're promised over the next 2 years? Can you please answer that and confirm for me if this is the Cabinet's plan?
I always find it slightly amusing when the government says something, it must be about the local and European election, but when the opposition does something, it's nothing at all to do with it. I'm sure you're hoping to get a few votes yourself in the election, and I wish you well. The government did have an important discussion and a series of proposals today, around 15 actions indeed, around small and medium enterprises, because Deputy Smith is correct. They are really feeling the pinch. And you'll know it in your constituency, I know it in mine. Small businesses, cafe owners, restaurateurs, hairdressers, others, butchers, the ones on the main street that we all know in towns and villages. They've seen a lot come at them in a short space of time, and they say to you this, they say, it looks very busy in here, doesn't it? It's hard to get a table, it's hard to get a seat. But I tell you, when you do the books at the end of the week or the end of the month, the margin is tight. And they've asked the government to listen, and we've committed to doing that. We've listened, and today we've acted. Tomorrow the package will be announced. But let me tell you what it will do, and let me tell you what it won't do. So what it will do is look at how initiatives that we've had in place, like the increased cost of business grants that have worked well for many businesses, can we give another blast of that into some small and medium businesses? Can we give another bit of assistance in terms of a direct cash injection? That's one of the things that it'll look at. Can we look at things like making sure that when the minimum wage is increased as it was, that there's a lower rate of employers' PRSI, so that the employer doesn't feel like they're being hit twice? Can we look at things like the commitment in the programme for government in terms of an SME test being applied? It's easy in here to come up with a great idea. Often we don't have to pay for it. It's the small and medium businesses that do. And we need to be factoring that in, because we don't want anyone to lose a job here, because that's the most important protection you can give any worker. Now, I'm extremely proud, Deputy Smith, of this government's record when it comes to workers, and this government's record when it comes to supporting hard-working people. You only have to look at the minimum wage. It's now €12.70. It increased by €1.40 per hour just 5 months ago. A very large single increase, an increase of 12% when the inflation rate last year was around 5.3%. We are the government that introduced a sick pay scheme. There's no one talking about rolling back on anything. What we're talking about doing, though, is following the evidence, having the ESRI do a piece of research about what happens next. What has the impact been? How are SMEs coping with it? How is it working in practice? That sounds sensible. We're a government that's introduced parental leave. We're a government that's made progress in remote working. We're a government that's really reduced the cost of childcare at least twice. We're a government that reduces tax on low and middle income workers. And we're a government that established the Low Pay Commission. Now, you know very well the process the Low Pay Commission goes through. It has workers' reps, it has business reps, it has an independent chair, it does its work over the summer, and then it generally reports to government. So I agree with you, if this is the point you're making, that we shouldn't pit the needs of one against the needs of others. But we should be conscious in here, and we have to be, and if you're not hearing this on the hustings, you're on very different hustings to me. We should be listening to people who are saying, you come up with your bright ideas in here, but you're not considering the impact it's having on my cafe, my butchers, my small clothes shop. And that's the balance we're trying to get right. I believe with the range of packages we've gotten in place, details of which will be announced tomorrow, we have gotten that balance correct.
Thank you, Taoiseach. Deputy Smith.
Well, I probably am on the same type of hustings as you. Yeah, 8% of workers in this country are on the minimum wage, and they're the people who I meet. And the postponement of an increase for them is cruel, unnecessary, and instead of having a progressive rate of tackling the businesses and giving them different rates that they have to pay over, you're tackling workers. You're attacking workers' rights again. It's about almost a year ago when we brought a bill before the House to get rid of the discrimination against young workers in the minimum wage legislation. Your government said park it for a year and we'll come back to you. I'm dying to hear what you have to say the first week in June about that bill that you parked for a year. I wonder, have you even looked at it? Because it's very clear to me that this is about picking the low-hanging fruit. If you want to support the businesses that you meet on the hustings, and not all businesses are covered by this, by the way, many of the businesses that you're giving supports to, and SIPTU have proved this in their research and research from Maynooth College, many of the businesses that you're giving the extra support to are very profitable. The point is here that it's not targeted at those who need it the most in business terms. What it is targeted at is those who need the increase most in wage terms.
Taoiseach.
So that's either an unintentional or a deliberate misunderstanding of the government's increased cost of business scheme, which is targeted. I mean, I'm sure you've all gotten into your constituency office queries, why do I not qualify? Because I'm over a certain threshold. There's very clear thresholds in relation to this being targeted. You know that. And if there's any member of Dáil Éireann who doesn't believe we should pay out another additional sum of the increased cost of business grant to retail or hospitality, please let me know. Let your constituents know. Let the cafe owners know. But I would have thought there's a consensus that the increased cost of business grant is the very least we should be doing to try and help businesses at this hard time. And what we're trying to do in advance of the budget is see how we can be innovative within the resources that we have available. But I don't buy into this idea of pitting one group of people against the others. And I don't need to be... No, that's what you wish we were to do. That's what you would thrive on us doing. That's what you'd like to tell people we do. Sorry. Every time I speak, it's something. Every time you speak, it's authoritative. And every time I speak, you just try to degrade it. The reality...
Deputy,
that's
please.
just because you know everything. Fair play to you. But I'll tell you this. We cut taxes. We cut childcare. We increase the minimum wage. We introduce statutory sick pay. We support remote working. We're building more homes. We have the backs of workers in this country. We don't need any lectures from you on it.
Mí maga the cean cóla an híisi bhhatlam an spot hollas a euros ja chahar na gaillimhe agus conda na gaillimhe inniu agus mar is all ditches cahar álinné cahar itá go teoracúil cahar gáithangach agus an gata don ghaeltacht is mó sa tír agus tá dearagar an go bhfuil lán fostaíochta an ach tá feibanna tromcúiseacha ó híomh cuasaí tííochta agus go háirid infrastructure aspa infrastructure bunsuka atá fitche fusa leis an aibo híomh tíochtara. I'm putting the spotlight on Galway City and County today, and there are many good things I could say about it, but I want to focus in today, highlight the absolute problem with housing, but from a different perspective today, the absolute absence of basic infrastructure. We have a wastewater treatment plant in Mutton Island right beside where I live, which has been upgraded a few years ago and is able to cope with a population equivalent of 170,000. However, the collection network is seriously deficient, and that encompasses Ordenmore, Barna and the city. We have 2 siphons under the River Corrib, which are inadequate and have been identified for a very long time. We have an inadequate situation in Ornmore and in Merlin Park. An application for a storage area in Merlin Park was put in by Uisce Éireann and was subsequently withdrawn. I have 1.5 minutes to make a pitch for Galway City, and what I want to do here is to highlight that Uisce Éireann, and I don't wish to actually demonise Uisce Éireann. I believe it should have stayed with the local authorities. And indeed, they put in a comprehensive plan way back in 12 and 13, which wasn't approved by the department because of the future birth of Uisce Éireann. So what are we doing now in Galway City? We have no wastewater treatment plant on the east of the city, which is absolutely stymieing development. The Ardon plan of 10,000 people cannot go ahead. Within the city, taken in Ardmore and Barna, we have a combined sewage and storm water, which overflows all of the time. And in one particular case, after the EPA visited Ardmore, they found that there had been 70 overflows of combined stormwater and sewage into Galway Bay, not reported to the EPA alone following their site inspection. And we have an open compliance investigation, open I think since 2008, although could be 10, in relation to the deficiencies in the system, constant overflows which should be confined to unusual weather conditions, but alone in 23, 70 overflows not reported to Uisce Éireann. What is my point today? There cannot be development in Galway City in any sustainable way unless we face the infrastructure problems. There can be no balanced regional development if we don't have a sewage treatment plant in Carrow. I will come back maybe to transport in a minute. Thank you very much.
Well, I want to thank Deputy Connolly for raising the question. I think she'll understand and appreciate where I may have to come back to her on some of the specific issues that she's highlighted in relation to her constituency, as is right and proper for her to do so. But I do take at a broad level the importance of, when we look at the issue of housing, and when we look at the issue of balanced regional development, needing to look at it in the round. And I can sense your frustration, and I'm sure that of your constituents, in relation to investment in wastewater treatment plants, but then issues in relation to connection in a number of the areas that you've outlined as well. We do believe very much in balanced regional development. Balanced regional development is not just a nice to do, it is absolutely essential. I think if we're to create the country that we want to, the quality of life that people want, and also meet the housing needs of people and the wish for people to continue to be able to live in their community, raise a family and work in their community as well. What I'm very happy to do, Ceann Comhairle, on foot of the specific issues that Deputy Connolly has raised, I'm very happy to take a look specifically at them, not just in relation to her own constituency, but in relation perhaps more broadly to the need for us to ensure that we take a very joined up approach to anything that we do in relation to ensuring that housing supply can flourish in all parts of this country, including of course in Galway City and County. So I'm very happy to come back to Deputy Connolly, and very happy maybe to receive the specifics of the issues that she's raised, and I'll undertake to directly engage with her.
Perhaps I can use a little bit of the time that you didn't use, with the permission of the Ceann Comhairle, because it's really important here. It shouldn't be up to me to raise this with you. We have Uisce Éireann, the body in charge. We have the local authorities. We have plans. We have conditions set with a licence that are not being complied with. These are not my words. These are the EPA outlining it with an open compliance investigation. So either Uisce Éireann don't know what they're doing, which is not my way, or they don't have enough staff, or the government is not behind them. But we can't have a situation where basic infrastructure, the collection of the sewage and the stormwater, is inadequate. The actual network of collection is inadequate. It's inadequate for years, identified by the local authorities, identified by the EPA, identified by Irish Water. So Galway is one of the 4 cities outside of Dublin to develop, to increase its population up to 120,000. It can't do that, and neither can we have balanced regional development. I hear your beliefs. I don't really want your beliefs. What I want to see is action. I want to see what feedback is going back from Irish Water to the Minister's Department there, Finance and Public Expenditure and Reform. Where is the connection between what's needed in Galway City and in the regions, and what is actually happening on the ground? What do we need to do? And finally, in relation to Galway City, it's absolutely caught up with traffic. We're now finally, back in 2018 or 17, 24,000 people signed a petition. Please do a feasibility study on light rail. That's finally been done by a body that said it wasn't possible, but they're now looking at it. And here we are similarly on Friday, there's a conference in relation to the Western Rail Corridor. These are are all basic infrastructure in addition to what I'm highlighting here. Basic collection of wastewater, not adequate, so no development can take place. So therefore the housing crisis is going to intensify and planning applications will be refused, as have been refused right up for the last number of years because of inadequate infrastructure.
I don't have the figures in front of me, but I would imagine, and I'll certainly check, I would imagine that housing commencements in Galway City are increasing as they are across the country. But let me check the point. I'm not taking from the point you made, but I do know that right across the country now, housing commencements are increasing. I want to assure the Deputy of this, that when state agencies like Uisce Éireann and others make investment decisions, they of course do that cognizant of both the National Planning Framework and the National Development Plan. We will have a new National Planning Framework being published in draft form towards the end of June. There will be an opportunity at that stage for all agencies, indeed yourself and your community, to also contribute in relation to the important needs of your community. And I will specifically undertake to pursue the issues that you raised regarding Uisce Éireann and some of the infrastructural issues with Minister O'Brien in relation to this case, and happy to come back to you if you want to provide me with more details of where you believe there's to be particular blockages in relation to development in Galway City or County. I too am pleased with the work underway in relation to the Western Rail Corridor and Light Rail, and I do think any fair objective analysis of this government's time in office has seen a very significant increase in public transport. I think Minister Ryan is to be commended for that.
That concludes leaders' questions and enables us to proceed to the order of business in accordance with Standing Order 36. I call on the Government Chief Whip, Hildegard Naughton, to move that the arrangements for the week's business be agreed to.
I move.
Is that agreed?
Agreed.
Not agreed. Deputy Mary Lou McDonald.
Count Corla, for the second week now, I ask that Minister Helen McEntee and Minister Roderick O'Gorman present themselves, make a statement to the House on their handling of the immigration issue, particularly the situation as pertains today on the Grand Canal in Dublin, where there are now 40 tents with unfortunate, vulnerable people living in a tent at the side of a canal. If ever there were an image for your abject failure in this area, it is that. We have a situation, Count Corla, where on the one hand the state distributes tents, pays money to distribute tents to these vulnerable people, and then at the far end commits money to have these tents removed, only for more tents to appear. This is utterly scandalous. It is causing huge unease, not just across the city of Dublin, but far beyond. And we need, Count Corla, answers, and we need accountability from Minister O'Gorman, from Minister McEntee, and indeed from the government.
Deputy Batchik, please.
Well, Count Corla, I too would like to see a debate, an urgent debate this week on the government's plan to provide sustainable accommodation for those who come here seeking international protection. I've just come from the canal earlier today, along Baggot Street Bridge, 48 tents now. I welcomed last week the multi-agency operation. I was down there to observe it, and it was certainly inhumane and unsustainable to see so many people who were then camped along the canal at Wilton Place and Percy Place. I was glad to see government providing alternative accommodation, but over the few days since then, we've seen more people left in the same inhumane conditions. We've seen attacks on people who are sleeping in tents, attacks on volunteers who are helping them, and I want to commend the amazing volunteers. We've seen the state now fencing off large tracts of public space along the canal. This is not sustainable. So we need to hear from you, Taoiseach, and indeed from government ministers, as to how you plan to address the issue of accommodation for those seeking international protection as a matter of urgency. We can't see this revolving door approach.
Thank you, Deputy.
This approach where we see just week to week solutions that are quick fixes that fix nothing for those who are forced to sleep in these inhumane and unsustainable conditions.
Deputy Gary Gannon.
Taoiseach, let me ask, have you yourself taken a walk alongside the Grail Canal lately? Because I did earlier on today and did do over the weekend. And what is usually a public amenity for the citizens of Dublin, where you would see people on a day like today having a picnic, having a jog along the canal, Your government has erected fencing. Now, don't shake this. So you orchestrated the multi-agency task force, and I would argue strongly that rather than the tents, which are equally a failure, those hoardings are a reflection of your failure, a state-sponsored vandalism that is desecrating this city. So, Taoiseach, do we get the opportunity or the good graces to tell us what exactly is the plan? Are you going to keep fencing off the city of Dublin? The fact that we don't have statements, or there isn't a Minister for Justice or a Minister answering questions this week, is a poor reflection of the commitment to the citizens of Dublin and the vulnerable people in those tents. So as a matter of urgency, I would like to be updated on the plan for my city.
Deputy Boyd Barrett.
Taoiseach, you boasted earlier on about the increased construction of housing under your government. What you're not acknowledging is that the vast majority of what's being delivered is completely unaffordable. We get 10% social housing on private developments, the rest is unaffordable rents, unaffordable house prices, and the result is a record homelessness, particularly egregiously for families and children. If you were buying houses instead of leasing them and getting a higher proportion, we might actually impact as well as building social and affordable housing as we need. But I have been asking and got agreement in principle that there would be statements from Minister O'Brien giving an update on Housing for All for weeks now. There was supposed to be 4 a year. There was a commitment there would be 4 progress reports a year about Housing for All. They disappeared from the agenda, which maybe suits the government. You know, let's point the finger at migrants, but not talk about the government's record to actually deliver social and affordable housing. So when are we going to have the statements, as promised by Minister O'Brien, on the Housing for All and addressing the housing and homelessness crisis in this country?
I'm addressing you, but I'm addressing my remarks to all the party leaders who eventually finally have woken up. They were part of the problem all along with the last 12 months. Not allowing debate, not wanting debate, shutting down debate. Name-calling people who were looking at debate, myself and my colleagues in the Rural Independents. But now, because it's arrived in the leafy suburbs of Dublin 4, and you're putting up tents and fencing to keep people out, when ordinary people in Rossgrey, when ordinary people in Newtown Mount Kennedy and all over the country, in Clonmel now, attempt to have a protest, peaceful protest, and put up some small barricades, not barricades as such like you have, the power of the state, they're demonised and blackguarded and condemned by everybody here, and indeed your mouthpieces and RT and others. So now you have it, you won't have a debate. I want the Minister of Justice in here. You can shake your head on you, right? It's facts. And you had the support of all the parties here, every one of them. And now the local elections and the European elections, and you're getting it in the face, and you don't want it. Yeah. So now it's a topic we have to deal with because it's hurting you.
Thank you,
so
Deputy.
You wouldn't deal with it all along. You wouldn't even have a debate in this chamber. So a plague in all your houses.
Deputy Connolly. Yes, please, please.
Cairns, I would like to support the call for a debate in this House. As of today, the figures for the international protection applications not offered accommodation is 1,780, which is 65 up on last Friday. And I would ask for that debate to take place because what's happening in our name is shocking. Shocking for those who are living in tents, as has been described, and also particularly dangerous for the public discourse. I'm seeing posters going up in Galway that are absolutely shocking. And I know you're nodding your head in agreement, Taoiseach, but I'm afraid you have left a vacuum and you have let this happen. By doing this, you were told that direct provision was inadequate, you were told to change that, and the narrative at the moment that's emanating from yourselves and on the right is simply dangerous, appalling, and against our international obligations. I see the Minister there. I would say he was left on his own for a very long time, and no joined up from the government in relation to this. We're utterly failing in our obligation under our international treaties and conventions, and all of the time a horrible, horrible discourse is prevailing.
Taoiseach, please.
Well, look, I think there's very many legitimate requests for a debate in relation to migration. I think what's not legitimate is when members of this House say things that are completely offensive and Trumpian, in fact. When you say things like mouthpieces in media, when you say things like there hasn't been a debate in this House. That's just untrue, Deputy. So, like, Count Corley, you can sure check the record of this House. There have been many, many, many debates. So for the old social media clip, you stand up and you slur the media. You call them mouthpieces because, you know, that's kind of Trumpian, isn't it? You get a few likes in America on that, a few retweets. And then you say there's been no debates. Why can't you be like, I mean, many members of the opposition have asked for a debate in relation to migration. I'm happy for there to be a debate in this House in relation to migration. I think it's a matter for the Business Committee to decide when best to schedule that. We have our business schedule this week. You've had many private members' motions this week. Is there 3 private members' motions? 3? Sure, no, and you also had, I think you have 2 private members' motions in this House this week, one on a very important topic indeed. But I mean, there are options for people in terms of how they wish to use their proportion of Dáil time as well. We are happy to have a debate on migration in this House, and we're happy to engage with the Business Committee as to how best to go about that and the appropriate time and the appropriate time for that. But let's also have a degree, when we have that debate, again a degree of context and fairness. The government met today and the government considered 10 actions in relation to how we can look at a whole variety of ways to make our migration system more sustainable. This is not a question of abject failure. This is a question of looking at how the numbers have gone from about 3,500 people a year to a situation where we saw 106,000 people fleeing war in Ukraine since 2022 coming to these shores, where we've seen international protection numbers rise very significantly. And we're having to build systems in real time to respond to that situation. I'm very satisfied that a number of the actions that we've taken today are very much that whole of government joined up approach that we want. In relation to a debate on housing for all, again, I have no difficulty with that being scheduled for the appropriate time. In fact, the government has an awful lot that it wishes to say in relation to the progress being made in relation to housing.
Thank you very much. I'm going to put the proposal. The proposal is that the arrangements be agreed to.
Not agreed.
Talk to your Hefner Tarishkan Abadish Thaw, and again a Neil, Stolim Kilkeshwich, vote hall.